Above us, there are still people who haven't been rescued yet.
What Mexico City experienced this year, something we'll expect in Sacramento too.
Who are you going to sell it to if nobody will buy it from you?
I hope I get clean.
Are psychedelics the new medical marijuana?
Where is my generation going to live?
Hi, I'm Lilia Luciano. Throughout the past year, together we have witnessed some big events, we've visited some gnarly places, and we've broken down systems in our society that are simply messed up. In the next half hour, I'd like for us to revisit and recontextualize some of these stories that I thought were of great impact to not just the world we live in, but my generation in particular. We'll start off in Mexico City, where I visited with a local Sacramento structural engineer through the rubble and the devastation of the recent earthquakes. We met up with Sacramento-based structural engineer Dr. Kit Miyamoto and his team in Mexico City. As a California Seismic Safety Commissioner, he's here to understand the damage and the response to Mexico's 7.1 magnitude earthquake and bring that wisdom back home.
My kind of a first impression just seeing this is the, it's not big earthquake, it's moderate impact.
The hardest hit buildings this time were precisely the ones that survived 85. Most of them what he labeled non-ductile concrete buildings, or brittle buildings, lacking any kind of bracing or steel reinforcement. Kit says Sacramento has hundreds of those, which might need retrofitting.
You can add seatbelts essentially to make it safer to live. Is it 100% risk-free? No.
Another life-saving measure which we don't have here are earthquake alarm systems.
So basically, this city is wired to many sensors around it. This case, people are talking about they had about somewhere between 20 seconds to 40 seconds. You know, depends on who you're talking to. They had that type of duration to be able to escape.
We went to the building at 286 Álvaro Obregón, the deadliest site in the city. We accessed the site through the building next door, where Kit assessed and compared the potential risks of every crack and every shift. As they lift layer upon layer of either side of the building in order to retrieve the bodies, the whole thing needs to be constantly rebalanced in order to avoid further destruction that could endanger the rescue teams.
Above us, there are still people who haven't been rescued yet, so they're working really hard to get all the bodies out. Family members are outside on the other side of this building with the press. It's a devastating and scary and still fragile scene here.
A month and a half after our trip to Mexico, we met up with Kit once again, this time at the Mexican consulate in Sacramento. We both spoke before the California Seismic Safety Commission. I did just as a witness, him as an expert, of course. So what was the purpose of this meeting at with the California Seismic Safety Commission and the consulate in Mexico?
Well, basically what I testified and what you testified is essentially what we experienced out there, to share the information about what they went right and what they do wrong, to share how California can learn from it.
Okay.
And we had a lot of things that we can learn from it. So this is our issues we have. It belongs to San Francisco, belongs to LA, belongs to San Diego, belongs to here in Sacramento, by the way. But 20 years, 25 years is not fast enough. We need to do faster. Otherwise, we're going to lose thousands of people by the non-ductile concrete structures. We have the exact same buildings. And by the way, for Sacramento, implications are pretty big though. Because Bay Area earthquake, think about it. 150K is you're talking about Bay Area faults, right? We got the soft soil here too. So what Mexico City experienced this year, something we will expect in Sacramento too. So this is not only issue in the Bay Area or LA.
In the next weeks and months, we'll continue following up on this story and checking in with Kit to understand how California is preparing for a disaster of this magnitude. We'll be back with much more with Beyond the Headlines. Welcome back. Now it's time to talk weed. Californians voted and finally legalized it. And while there's still a bunch of questions up in the air about who can grow it and who can sell it, it is an estimated $4 billion industry. We went to the ArcView Group's conference. It's kind of like TechCrunch for pot to understand the implications and the range of possibilities for making money.
Thank you so much.
It's not for everyone. You do have to have a real desire to play a game that could bring upside.
ArcView Group holds these conferences around the world, and sure enough, the main attraction is the Shark Tank-style investor pitch forum.
We have the perfect time, the team, and the dedication to take this industry by storm.
I talked to one of the sharks.
When looking at companies to invest in, obviously it's management team because they have to be able to recover under extreme scenarios which you don't expect to happen.
There's people from tech moving into this industry, but also people from the industry applying the lessons that other people learned in tech into making their businesses successful. From cannabis oil extraction technology to edibles to this safe box that has the inventor fighting with everyone from big retailers who won't sell it to Snoop Dogg, who made him change the name.
So, you know, it's a lesson learned. You just have to move on and keep going.
Wouldn't it have been easier to just say, hey, Snoop or Snoop Dogg or Snoop Doggy Dog, or I don't know what he goes by now, let's just partner up and he'll help you market it?
Well, in some cases it would, but you kind of have to take into account what is the business cost to do that, because nothing is free.
I met a film director celebrating the women of cannabis.
I began my curiosity into cannabis because I heard a statistic that 36% of senior leadership in cannabis is women, and that's higher than any other industry.
And a designer working on high fashion handbags with odor controls and hidden pockets. It's hard to predict what will become of it. Some compare it to wine, others to craft beers. But this dude took it way further. He went as far as to wanting to replace alcohol altogether with his cannabis drinks. So the alcohol killer.
That's what we do.
Not the buzz killer.
No, there's other people doing that. I want sort of, we're poisoning ourselves, and I want the next generation to have an alternative to alcohol. So very different from what's on the market because they are brewed or distilled from cannabis.
Huh.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not surprised because this is a cannabis conference.
Right, that's right. That's what you expect here.
The conference opened my eyes to the future of weed, and I understood that we are witnessing a huge movement. But with all this innovation, I kept thinking about the OGs, the original growers, who have been the source for decades, some of whom were advocating against Prop 64 in fear of getting drowned out.
There's not enough respect put into 64 that protects small growers from destruction by large influxes of outside money and what do you call it, mega farms.
There's a lot of animosity, I think, towards people coming in with money into the industry.
Philip Norcutt is at the real estate side of the boom. He finds land for people to grow weed.
Growers, you know, I ran into a guy the other day and he told me, I've been growing for 30 years, I don't need to know what's going on. That guy's gonna get left behind. You know, it's not a question of, like in the old days, you know, could you get away with it? The question's going to be in the future, who are you going to sell it to if nobody will buy it from you? What we're seeing right now in the industry is guys coming from other businesses, like the tech industry, are coming in. They're great business people. It doesn't matter what the product is. They know how to manage it, they know how to market it, they know how to sell it. And I think one way to adapt is to partner with those people, right? And say, I'm a grower, I have knowledge about this, you have money and business experience, let's start a company.
There's still a lot to figure out legally speaking, and the recreational marijuana law doesn't come into effect until 2018. But at this point, it seems clear that the industry is serious, and it's here to stay. Now to understand more about the business of weed, joining me is Alex Traverso. He's the Chief of Communications at the Bureau of Cannabis Control here in California. Alex, first of all, tell me, where are we standing when it comes to regulation? I mean, can we just get into the business come January 1st?
It's a little bit more complicated than that in the sense that, you know, you already have to, for those folks who are already in the business and are operating medically, they're going to have an easier time. Those people that are starting from scratch, they're not precluded from entering the business, but it is going to be a little bit longer of a road to go.
And is it just kind of like January 1st, you walk out of your New Year's party and walk into a formerly medical dispensary and buy weed, or how does it work?
That's the misconception that I'm happy that we're going to clear up right now, because I feel like people do expect that they're going to be able to do that, and a lot of that is based on what's happening in the city and county that they live in. So if their city and county has an ordinance in place that allows for that, allows for adult use cannabis, commercial cannabis activity, then they're going to be able to do that. And if that's not the case, then they're going to have to wait until they have an ordinance.
Well, thank you so much for your time and wisdom, Alex. And when we come back, there's going to be more talk of legalization, from psychedelics to housing. Stick around. Before the break, we were talking about the business of weed and the coming commercial revolution of a substance that went from banned to medical to legal. But the challenges to the war on drugs don't end there, because there's other drugs like LSD, MDMA, and magic mushrooms that have also shown to have medical benefits. So how far are we from legalizing those? We started our exploration at the Psychedelics Science Conference in Oakland. This is the largest gathering of researchers and scientists and users of psychedelics, and we'll explore the question of whether or not psychedelics are the new medical marijuana. Ayahuasca is a drink made out of plants from the Amazon. It tends to be given as part of a ritual with a spiritual guide or shaman, following the ancestral traditions of native tribes, but it's become very popular outside of South America. Adam Andros is a psychologist and anthropologist. He lives in the Amazon, where he documents the effects of the treatment. What are the benefits? Because I understand it's like you go through this experience and then that changes you in a way.
You know, the experiences usually are very, very meaningful for people.
It's also not a party drug.
It's not a party drug, absolutely not a party drug, no. It is not usually a very pleasant experience, very physical, there's a lot of purging and vomiting and so on. It's definitely not something that you will do for fun.
It's also used to treat drug addiction and alcoholism. Scott says he owes his years of sobriety to this practice.
I was 33, 34, and someone told me about ayahuasca. And so I went down to the jungle and I did 15 ceremonies of ayahuasca in 30 days.
What?
And it literally
changed.
That is
a lot of throwing up, man.
It's, I would say, getting well.
He has since founded the Ibogaine Institute. Similar to ayahuasca, ibogaine is a natural psychoactive substance used to treat addiction by bringing people into the depths of their consciousness to the root causes of the disease. I had to see that happen in person. So we're crossing the border to Mexico right now because ibogaine and ayahuasca are illegal in the States, but in Mexico there's centers that offer these treatments. We're heading that way. I'm optimistic that this is the place. We're here. Good to see you.
Hey, Lilia.
Thank you.
See you again. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Ibogaine Institute.
Yeah. So is it legal here and not in the States, or are we just doing some shady all around?
This is unregulated right now.
Unregulated. So illegal.
It's not legal.
But it's not illegal.
We're all in this together. We're just trying to retrain our brains and look for new paths and new experiences.
How did it start, your addiction?
I guess I was in high school and pill form OxyContin came out and it just becomes something, a monkey on your back. And eventually heroin's cheaper.
I have a son, he's 6, but my mom has custody of him. She can give him a better life than I can right now, you know. I got into a car accident in 2007 and I fractured my pelvis in 2 spots, so I started using pain medication. And then once they stopped prescribing me pain medication, I started doing Percocets and OxyContin. That became too expensive, so then I just started heroin.
So what do you hope will happen after this?
I hope I get clean.
So we're heading in to witness the administering of the ibogaine. After detoxing for a couple of days, participants receive a full medical checkup. There's a doctor, nurses, an EMT team, and even an ambulance waiting outside just in case. And then they're under, hallucinating, in their deepest levels of consciousness for over 12 hours.
Adios, amigos.
Studies have shown that only 30% of people who are opioid dependent stay sober after a year of undergoing a residential treatment. Scott says his success rate is around 70%.
They're coming face to face with parts of themselves that they've been unwilling to look at.
Kimberly's woken up. We can't bring a lot of light in because their senses are heightened, but it's okay for us to go talk to her.
Do you remember the experience? Do you remember last night?
Mm-hmm. Close. It's just like a little video screen that like kind of like just, I don't even know, it just keeps going and going. Like things from your past that like have been brought up and like memories and stuff like that.
For all that we've heard about how MDMA could be great for treating PTSD and ayahuasca for addiction or LSD for mood disorders, all of the science is still very scarce, and that's because all of these drugs are still illegal.
Well, it prevents all psychedelic research from moving forward inexpensively. Professor Nutt says it cost us $15,000 a subject, and the LSD should have cost about $35.
MAPS, conducting the MDMA study for PTSD, is about to enter phase 3 of clinical trials. If they prove the medical benefits, a cost they estimate at around $20 million, they can apply to reschedule the drug and produce it. Are psychedelics the new medical marijuana, which is now so widely accepted as for its medical and scientifically proven benefits? How far are we from that when it comes to psychedelics?
You know, I think the popular consciousness is not there as yet. We've just begun to do some public opinion polling on it. And whereas you now have 80 to 90% of Americans believing that marijuana should be legal for medical purposes, which is up from 60% 20 years ago, on psychedelics, there's a growing awareness, but it hasn't penetrated, I think, the mass consciousnesses yet. So in that respect, it is the new medical marijuana.
MAPS is now sponsoring the research to reschedule MDMA in order to use that as a drug to treat patients suffering from PTSD. When we come back from the break, we'll discuss the legalization of housing. We're on R Street. This is one of the most rapidly developing areas here in Sacramento, and that's kind of a big deal considering the level of resistance that we find in California to development. As an older millennial, the housing crisis has become one of those issues that hit really close to home. We've covered it all the way from homelessness to the fires to the emergence of a new movement that's pro-housing, pro-development, and pro-millennial. Meet the Yimbys.
We need housing. People are being forced out. Further and further and further away. Where is my generation going to live?
What's holding back housing and keeping those housing prices so high?
California needs to create about 180,000 units of housing per year throughout the state. We're producing about half of that per year. It shouldn't take 2, 3, 4 years to approve new housing if that housing complies with zoning.
Home ownership for people under 35 is at a historic low, with 40% of millennials living with their parents, twice the rate as in 1980. And in the Bay Area, for every 8 new jobs created, only 1 new housing unit is added to the market. Paavo Monkkonen is an associate professor of urban planning at UCLA. He researched the causes and effects of opposition to urban development.
We have very small cities in many cases in a big metropolitan area. And there's a collective action problem whereby each city kind of wants development to happen somewhere, just not in their city. And so they're fighting against each other to prevent development and push it elsewhere.
Not in my backyard,
right? So,
right?
Yes, not in my city, not in my backyard.
He says when people object to increasing density in cities by building more and higher, cities then grow horizontally, what's called urban sprawl. And that leads to more people commuting to work from further and further away, which in turn harms the environment. Something polls show millennials care 3 times more about than their parents' generation. That kind of opposition is what drove Yimbys to their first battleground. Long and, well, kind of boring city planning meetings.
And I think it's important for you all to keep in mind that this is not necessarily the most democratic way to get the pulse of people's reaction to building housing in their neighborhood. The people who are able to make time to come out on a Thursday afternoon and voice their concerns or supports to you are crazy people like me.
Calvin Welch is an affordable housing activist who says the reason he opposes market rate development in San Francisco is because it displaces people.
It's low-income immigrants that are being kicked out. It's low-income people in Chinatown, low-income people in the Mission. That's who's being...
How is more development kicking out low-income people, immigrants, etc.?
Because low-income people live in low-density housing. Market rate developers buy that housing, tear it down, and build high-density housing because they can.
No, the whole point of Yimbism is that we don't want to displace anyone. And the way it is now, every time someone new comes, someone else has to leave. But we think that's bad. Being pro-housing is like playing musical chairs, where you let people bring their own chairs.
According to the San Francisco Planning Department, under current zoning, the city can actually add about 140,000 units. That's 40% more. And a study by the California Legislative Analyst shows places with high rates of market development have low rates of displacement. As journalists, we listen to every perspective and navigate stories objectively. But in this story, I came across a series of assumptions about my own generation that I personally felt I had to respond for.
The way I went to school at San Francisco State, I lived with 6 other students. Nobody wants to do that anymore. Your generation doesn't want to do that.
Students will do it, but I'm 32 years old.
Right,
I'm sorry,
right.
I'm not 22.
Right.
That's different. I want to have kids. It's not that millennials don't want to live with roommates or millennials want to live with their parents. It's that it's absolutely unaffordable. I can't plan for kids at 32, and guess what? I only have a few years left. Here are some stats. Millennials are more educated than any other generation, but they earn 20% less than baby boomers did at their age. They're seeing their wages decline, undergoing longer periods of unemployment, and according to census data, more than 20% of them live in poverty. That's 14% up from 1980. Millennials are also burdened with student debt, which boomers didn't have. Bruce Gibney, venture capitalist and author of A Generation of Sociopaths, How Baby Boomers Betrayed America, says it's not millennials who are entitled.
Boomers have, especially in the media, have been keen to label millennials as entitled. I think if anything, the millennials are probably, and this is going to be controversial, not entitled enough. I think they're entitled to a highly functional government that serves everyone's interests over the long term. And I think that they should demand it. And that boomer government, the government that we have now, has not been serious about serving the needs and interests of millennials. You know, if I had one message to sort of younger voters, it's get out there and vote. Vote aggressively. It's a passionate crowd, and that passion needs to translate into votes, and those votes need to be directed against the boomers.
After this story aired, YIMBY celebrated huge victories. Most importantly, their activism was crucial in passing a package of bills aimed at loosening the housing crisis by streamlining development and raising billions of dollars in funds for affordable housing. They're celebrating, but the crisis continues. That's it for Beyond the Headlines. I'm Lilia Luciano. Thank you for watching.